Okay, so we're going to finish up with some frequency distributions and move on to percentiles in this first part of the lecture today. So last time we were creating frequency distributions for ranked qualitative and quantitative data. And now we're going to talk about how to do this from scratch. So we did those in class, but we're going to talk about creating grouped frequency distributions from scratch to start out with. So here are the basic steps that you're going to need to follow. So go back to your notes from last time if you can't remember some of these terms. Alright, so first what we need to do is determine the range of scores. So take the highest score that is in your data set and then subtract the lowest score from the data set out of it. So you're getting the range, highest minus the lowest. Then you need to determine the width of each of the classes. This is going to be called W. And what you want to do is divide the range, which you got in step 1, by the desired number of classes. So I might tell you something like we need 6 classes here or something like that, and that's what the desired number of classes will be. And then you want to find the nearest pretty number, so multiples of 5 are good, and that's what you're going to want your class width to be. Somewhere in a multiple of 5 is usually the best way to go. So 5, 10, 15, 20, those sorts of things. Alright, then you need to determine where the lowest class should begin, and this should be an even multiple of W. So even if your score, the lowest score you had was maybe something like 74, if you had a class width of W that needed to be 5, you would want to include that, which would mean you'd have to start at 70, not at 75, because you'd be missing a lowest score of 74. So you need to determine where the lowest class should begin and make an even multiple of W. Then you also should determine where the lowest class should end. So this is the higher end of their interval range. So you do this by adding the lowest, determine where the lowest part of the class should begin, so L plus W, the width of the class, and then minus 1 unit of measurement. And then you work upwards to include as many classes as necessary to include all the data. So we'll go through an example now. So then once you have all of these, right, you have the class intervals, then you can do the frequency distribution, the relative frequency distribution, the cumulative frequency distribution, and the cumulative relative frequency distribution. So let's do this as an example, like I said. And what I'm going to show you is some data. This is a class of 20 students, and these are the scores that they got on their final exam. They all did very well. And so what we can see, if you take a look at this, we have scores ranging anywhere from 82 is the lowest, all the way up to 99, which was the highest score. And we want to create 4 classes. So we want basically 4 rows in your table. So now the goal is going to be to create this table, create those grouped interval classes, and then create the frequency distribution, the relative frequency distribution, the cumulative frequency distribution, and the cumulative relative frequency distribution. So for those of you who are going to work through this, which you should, go ahead and pause here and make sure you write out these numbers, take a screenshot, something like this, so you have all of these numbers here, so then you can start creating and going through the steps. Now, for some of you, you might want to take a pause here and just go through the steps I mentioned before, these 5 steps on how to create the grouped frequency distribution in the last slides. That's fine. Just go ahead and try to do it now on your own. For the rest of you, what we're going to do is go through the steps together, and we'll go through this so that you can see exactly how I calculated each one of these. Even if you go ahead and do this on your own and just try to go do it without any help, you can then watch the rest of this video and make sure that everything was working out the way you had hoped. Okay, so let's go through the first step. Alright, so let's take a look at the first step. What we have is the range. We wanted to create that by subtracting the lowest score from the highest score. So we have 99 minus 82, which is a range of 17 points across this particular class, this classroom, these data. And then we need to create the interval width, W. And the way we do this is by taking the range and dividing it by the number of classes, the number of desired classes. And we said here it was 4. So we have 17 in the range divided by 4, which is the number of interval classes we'd like to have. And what we get is 4.25. And okay, this isn't a pretty number here, so let's get it close to a pretty number, like the pretty number 5. So here, we'll just say that for this particular example, our width, W, is going to be 5. So the interval width is going to be 5. All right, so now we need to determine where the lowest class begins. And because the lowest score is 82, we need the lowest class to begin at a multiple of 5, the width, and still include 82. So we need to round down basically by that width and start our lowest class at 80. So we don't want to start it at 85 because we wouldn't be including our lowest score. So we need to round down and get to 80. So that's where we'll start our lowest class. Now we need to determine where that class ends. So we take the lowest score, which we already talked about, the beginning of the lowest class, which was 80, which is a multiple of the width. Then we need to add the width to it. We have L plus W, and then we have minus 1. That's actually supposed to be minus 1, not a minus W. You can go ahead and correct that on your own notes. So what we'd have here is 80 plus 5, so the lowest part of the class plus the width, and then we subtract 1 from that. That gives us 84. So now we have the lowest end of the class, 80, and the higher end of that first class, 84. So that's what you'll see in the first row, the bottom row of your table. And then we work upwards and end up with 4 classes. So let's take a look at what this distribution would look like. So, like I said, we started with our lowest level of the class, 80 to 84, which we just showed you how we calculate. And now we're going to move up in class widths while never letting our classes overlap. So our next one is going to start at 85, right? That's the next unit of measurement up. So we have 85 to 89. Again, adding that class width of 5. Minus 1, 90 to 94, and then 95 to 99. Again, each of those class widths is going to equal the lowest end of the class plus the width minus 1, and that's how we created these. So make sure you go back and check to see that these are the classes that you came up with. Some places where you might have gone wrong would have been to say 80 to 85, 85 to 89. Remember to always minus 1 like we did when we were creating the class widths in the last few steps. All right, so now that you have this, this table, you can start filling in the frequency, relative frequency, cumulative frequency, and cumulative relative frequency. And so just do this as we did before by tallying up scores to get the frequency. So let's take a look. So pause it here if you haven't done it yet. If you already have, then take a look at the frequency distributions here. And what we see, we have 5 scores that fall in the 95 to 99 range, 6 in the 90 to 94, 4 in the 85 to 89, and 5 in the 80 to 84. Which equals 20, the number of students in this particular class who took the final exam. Now we needed to create the relative frequency distribution. So if you haven't done that, take a pause here and do it. Otherwise, if you already have, then what you see is that we need to divide the number in the frequency column by the total number of observations, and then that gives us our relative frequency. So we have 25% of the scores between 95 and 99. The way we got this is 5 divided by 20 equals 0.25, or 25%. And you can go through this and see for the rest of them how this all worked out. All right, and now take a pause if you're going to do the cumulative frequency distribution. Do that now if you haven't done it already. If you have, then let's go through the answers. So what you have is the cumulative frequency distribution, which means that the top row, right, has to equal the number of observations. So in this case, we have 20. But again, we like to work from the bottom up in this situation. So we have 80 to 84. 5 scores fell within that range. Now remember, the cumulative frequency distribution basically says how many scores fell at this level or below. So if we look at 85 to 89, what we see is that 9 scores fell below 89. So the 4 scores that were in the 85 to 89 range, plus the 5 scores that were in the 80 to 84 range. And then you can work your way down from there. And again, now we're going to go through the cumulative relative frequency distribution. So if you haven't done it yet, pause now. Otherwise, let's go through the answers. Now we always start, you know that you've done everything right if the cumulative relative frequency distribution adds up to 100% at the very, the top row is 100%. And then what you want to see is the percentage of scores that fall at or below a particular range. So at the 80 to 84 range, we have 5 scores that are at that range or below. So we see that that's 25%. But then as we move up to 85 to 89, we know that we have 9 scores that are at that range or below, and so that equals 45% of the distribution is at a score of 89 or below. And then you can work through the top, and again, 100% of the scores are 99 or below, of course. All right, so now what we've created is a grouped frequency distribution with interval class width of 5 and with 4 classes, just what we asked, just what we needed to do. So now the last thing I want you guys to work on is, for this particular part of the frequency distributions, is to get the true limits and the midpoints of each class and add it to a table. So calculate the true limits and the midpoint. So remember, the unit of measurement here is 1 point on the scale. So no one's getting any half credit points. It's all 1 point. So pause the video if you want now, and create a table that has the exam score ranges with their true limits and the midpoint of those interval class ranges. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and take a look at the answers here. So there are our exam scores. These are the ranges that we had, the interval class ranges that we had from before. And now we're going to fill in the true limits and the midpoint. And remember, the true limits are plus or minus half a unit of measurement on the high and low ends. So it's half a unit below the low end of the range and half a unit above the high end of the range. This is for that rounding we talked about in class. So if you take a look at the true limits, because the unit of measurement was 1 point, what we see is that we could start at the bottom here. Anything that would fall in the 80 to 84 interval class range is actually a true score of 79.5 to 84.5. So anything that falls within that range is what's going to actually be included in the 80 to 84 range. So it's half a unit of measurement below the lowest, 80, and half a unit of measurement above the highest, 84, within that class range. And then we do this for all of the same, all of the other classes as we move up. And remember here, true limits are allowed to touch each other. So we have 84.5 at the high end on the 80 to 84 class range, and we have 84.5 on the low end of the 85 to 89 class range. All right, and the midpoints are calculated by taking the high end plus the low end and dividing by 2. And it doesn't matter which one you use. You can use either the apparent limits here, the ones that we had in the table originally, or the true limits, and you should get the same answer. So let's take a look at those. So what you should see is 99 plus 95 divided by 2 equals 97, just as 99.5 plus 94.5 divided by 2 equals 97. And then you can go ahead and see the midpoints of each of these interval class ranges.